All right, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm excited to be able to offer some really cool information, best practices, and training and support for y'all during this difficult time for all of us. So let's get started. All right. So, of course, we are funded by the Office of Violence Against Women. So thank you for funding, especially this webinar, and my ability to offer some really cool trainings to y'all. All right. And as always, this webinar is interactive. I may be an introvert, but sometimes I do like to talk to other people. Although I love sitting in my empty house, talking to my computer screen in my kitchen, I want some feedback. So let's talk about your webinar control panel for a second here, okay? So first we have this little orange arrow. And this orange arrow is going to allow for your webinar control panel to expand and retract. So if your webinar control panel does not look like this, then it's in its retracted form. If you'd like to expand that to see all the other things that are available, that'd be great. We do have this raise your hand button, and we'll be using this if I ask a question like, hey, how many of you super love cats? And then you can, raise your hand, and I can get a little consensus of how many of y'all love cats, right? Next, here at the bottom, and this is what we're going to use the most. So this is the question box. So you can definitely ask a question with this anytime during the webinar. And as always, it's just me on the webinar. So I will definitely be monitoring that and trying to get your questions answered. And if for some reason I can't get your questions answered, then I will make sure to email that to you. So don't fret, we'll get through this together. But yeah, definitely ask your questions. Okay, so I would love if everyone would, in that little question box right now, type in there who you are, where you're from. Yeah, do a little introduction for me. Let's see who we have here. We have about 77 people on right now, so I want to see who those 77 people are. So go ahead and type in that question box who you be. All right, okay, so we have some system advocates, we have some folks from DWS, we have some community advocates from some of the shelters and that. We've got a couple therapists. We got a lot of folks from many parts of Utah representing. I'm feeling that. Nice. Some folks real close to me here in Ogden. Yay! We have some awesome folks from Alabama. I love when our out-of-state friends come and join us for these. Ooh. Oh gosh, we have a lot of really great folks. We have some graduate students in here, some sexual assault advocates, a bunch of social work folks, folks from some of the local universities. We've got some Utah State folks, some Weber State folks, some U folks. Oh, this is great. A couple folks from local hospitals. Got a bunch of IHC folks here today. Nice. Excellent. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. And lastly, it looks like we got a bunch of folks from some law enforcement agencies, some system advocates, too. Very cool. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. Excellent. Got a lot of cool folks here. Okay. So, yes, I am the bearer of free CEUs. And that may be the reason why you join these and why you love me. But yes, we do have an hour of CEUs available through NASW, through the Utah chapter. So how to get these CEUs, you will be given in an email tomorrow. There will be a link, and it will have a link to a Google form quiz that you just fill out. You have to get 70% or above, and then I will send you a CEU certificate. So Yeah, there you go. More reason to be here, right? Okay. So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics. So, becoming an advocate, what is an advocate, and trauma-informed advocacy, trauma-informed care, right? We've probably heard this a lot. We may be a little bit like, oh, what does that mean, really? What are the details? I've heard it. I kind of know what it means. But now we're going to go into some of that detail and give you a lot of that information, okay? So we're going to start by defining what an advocate is. We're going to explore the different types of advocates. And if you noticed, when I was looking through, the folks when they were, introducing themselves, I said system advocate and I said community advocate. So we're going to go over what those mean, right? So we are going to delve into trauma-informed advocacy, and we're going to understand a little bit better that trauma response, right? Some of these things that folks may be doing that we're like, oh, heck, like that, I don't like that. That, this makes it really hard to work with this person. And we're going to give you that information to maybe understand why they're doing that. Why are they acting that way, right? Okay, so if you've ever heard of the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition, that's us. That's who I work for. So basically, we're the federally recognized state coalition for domestic violence for the state of Utah. So what we do is we are a support organization. So we support, organizations, folks who serve survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And we do that through a number of different ways. We do it through trainings, we do it through education, technical assistance, support, site visits, stuff like that. One of the questions I often get is when I say technical assistance, I'm not talking about, if you can't get your mouse to connect to your laptop. I definitely wish I could help with that, and low key I probably could. However, when we're talking about that on a coalition level, what we're talking about is you reaching out to us and saying, hey, I have this problem, I have this issue, or I'm really struggling in providing services for this survivor. Do you know any best practices, or is there any support or help out there? And that's what I do, is I not only offer support, trauma-informed advocacy for advocates, but also I provide best practices, national resources. A big part of my job is translating, these big studies and information, that comes out from the federal government and some of these big organizations. I translate that into bite-sized pieces. So you'll see an example of that today. So yeah, that's what we do. I'm here to support, right? All right. And so here is a little bit about me. So my name is Andy Tremonti. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Education and Outreach Coordinator for the Coalition. So that means that I'm over the majority of the training that the Coalition offers, the majority of the education. So that's something I really enjoy, is doing these webinars and, connecting with folks, right? My education history is in psychology and women and gender studies, and I am currently a criminal justice grad student. So that's exciting. I'm pretty excited about that. I do have about 9 years of working with Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA survivors and other underserved survivors of trauma, so all sorts of trauma, not just sexual and domestic violence. Folks experiencing food scarcity, homelessness, childhood abuse. The biggest intersection of my experience comes from youth experiencing homelessness while also identifying as Two-Spirit or LGBTQIA. And last but definitely not least, I am a Sasquatch enthusiast. I'm pretty sure all of you already knew that. So I do love Dungeons and Dragons. Here is a dragon that I've been working on for the past couple days. I just have to finish the base and the horns, and it is looking really good. Very good for self-care, especially when you're locked in your house, right? Here's my sweet boy, Toriko. He's about 3.5 years. Actually, he'll be 4 in May. He's cute goose. This is my sweet Jorge, and he'll be 17 in May, and he really likes laundry. And one of my greatest loves is Xena, Warrior Princess. So there's just a little bit about me. Okay, so I want you to answer this question for me. So what do you think an advocate is? So in that question box, tell me, what do you think an advocate is? Why do we need them? Tell me, what do you think? All right, so let's see. We have, oh gosh, a lot. Okay, so to be people's a voice for folks. Let's see. Someone who helps someone with things they may not be able to do themselves, maybe supporting folks, right? Helping navigate through the systems. Yes, lend support, brainstorm. Yeah, especially to overcome obstacles. Ooh, I like this. Support their decisions, right? That's big. That's really big. It's just to support other people's decisions, right? Give them options, right? Someone who stands up for someone who may not be able to stand up for themselves. Yes, yes. Ooh, for folks that fight for the oppressed, right? Boost voices. Yes, yes, yes. Big part of it is that we don't want to speak over folks or necessarily for folks. We want to boost them, right? Want to boost them up. Ooh, someone who holds space for someone else. That's good, right? Let's see. These are great to help others. This is excellent. Yeah, to help empower others. Um, that's good. Yeah, I love that. Ooh, a right hand man. I've never gotten that one before. That one's great. All right, thank you, everyone. Okay, so let's go into this. Okay, so we know that advocates provide unique sets of support of services, right? The advocate's job is to literally provide these desperately needed services and supports that folks generally may not have access to, right? So not only do advocates provide support, not emotional and otherwise, but really big on education and resources, right? So think about how many of us could list off Utah's code or Alabama's, or I saw someone from Michigan in our chat box. How many of us can, recite our victims' rights statute, right? And even some advocates are like, oh, I can't do that, but I have paper and I have resources to be able to pass that information on, right? Think about the information that advocates provide that they share with survivors and victims about the criminal justice system and the court process, right? So as much as many of us have probably interacted with the court systems, it's still probably difficult to explain or maybe even understand all the parts of the court system, right? Especially when we're going through prosecution, litigation, all these different, different things. Big part of advocacy is updating survivor and notifying them on, changes and things like that, right? So, I mean, many of you talked about this in some of your comments. Why do we have advocates? So advocates are wonderful folks that not only provide, desperately needed services in their community, but they are a literal staple within a community. Where would we be without advocates? Where would we be without advocates, right? So not only on the intimate partner violence side, where we're working with protective orders and stalking injunctions, helping folks and assisting folks maybe fill that out or find resources on how to fill that out. But also with victim compensation forms. I mean, how many of us have seen a victim compensation form, let alone filled one out, right? And what happens after a victim or a survivor fills one out? How long does it take? Is there other things that I have to send in? So all these different things, right? And think about us as advocates. Oftentimes we act as a liaison, right? That we are, going between these different systems and different folks in order to, gain information resources for that survivor or victim that we're working with. And of course, this last one is that our relationship is not a set time with a survivor, right? So there are survivors that I've worked with literally for one phone conversation that was 5 minutes. And there are survivors that I have worked with for 10 years, right? So it depends on the survivor and what services you offer, and even your job details, right? So remember that there's no set time and no set length of working with a survivor. Okay, so here's a great visual of what advocates do, right? Advocates link survivors to services, and look at all these different services that are on here, right? Think about a time when maybe you or someone you know, a coworker or a colleague was working with a survivor or victim and linked them to a state agency, right? Link them to someone like DCFS or DWS, right? Department of Workforce Services, right? What about legal services, legal aid, right? Giving out even the hotline number for Timpanogos Legal Services, so someone could call and have maybe some support on answering a legal question or filling out forms, right? Of course, the justice system, right? Maybe linking them to a domestic violence police officer, right? And going through maybe some processes or an interview or finding out what resources there are, right? Yeah. So of course, domestic violence service providers within Utah, there's a number of different services that are offered. And it's really nice, especially in Utah, most of our providers are dual providers. So that means that they have not only a domestic violence program and domestic violence services, but they also have sexual assault prevention or sexual assault programs, right? And many of the organizations and shelters within Utah have a Code R, an HRT, a hospital response team, a SART team. So all of them, most of them have a team that goes out and responds to Code Rs, which in Utah, a Code R refers to a sexual assault kit, sane exam, at a hospital. So yeah, there's a number of things that we offer, and a lot of folks tend to think that domestic violence service providers only offer emergency housing, when in reality, emergency housing is probably not what a survivor may need, right? And when a survivor calls, a victim calls, that we're not necessarily assuming that, hey, well, you need this because you need to get out. When in reality, they may need just someone to talk to. They may need food, or they may need, shampoo, stuff like that, right? And so making sure that we're listening and finding out what they actually need. And that's a big part of trauma-informed care. So now, we're going to talk about the different types of advocates. So how about this? How about you tell me, what do you think a system advocate is? What do you think a community advocate is? In that question box, what do you think a system advocate is? What do you think a community-based advocate is? Okay, system advocates help with the legal system. Ooh, different levels of confidentiality. So a government program versus a local program, okay. System advocates help with courts. Community advocates help with community resources, okay. Yeah. Yeah, nice. It looks like, okay, yep. So system advocates answer to the system. So like court attorneys, police, stuff like that. A community advocate helps navigate multiple organizations. Yep, yep. Excellent, excellent. Those are all really great answers. Really great answers. So let's break this down. So we have system advocates and we have community advocates, right? So community advocates are not folks that work for nonprofit organizations. I would be considered a community advocate. YCC would be considered a community. South Valley Services, I saw New Horizons on there. I saw Peace House. All these would be an example of community-based advocates, right? So we're all nonprofits and we all fall under VAWA, FIPSA, and VOCA confidentiality, right? Okay, and then system-based advocates, those are folks that work with government organizations like a police agency. So sometimes they're called victim assistants. And those are folks that if you go into like a police agency and you request to talk to a victim advocate, or you go in to report domestic or sexual violence, and they link you up with the victim advocate that works at the police station, that would be what a system advocate would be. So community-based advocates. So community-based advocates generally work with survivors of domestic and sexual violence, human trafficking, other forms of interpersonal violence. And the big difference here is, especially in confidentiality, because community-based advocates are generally funded by federal funding, like VAWA, so the Violence Against Women Act, VOCA, the Victims of Crime Act, and then FIPSA is Family, I always forget this one, FIPSA, Family Violence Prevention Services Act. And you know, the confidentiality on these federal laws are pretty strict, right? And that is to help us be able to serve survivors, right? And so our main goal, our number one thing that we're trying to do, is to uphold confidentiality and safety for the folks that we work with, right? And so it's really important, especially when we're working with system advocates, that they understand where we're coming from and we understand where they're coming from, right? Because this confidentiality thing can be a really big barrier for folks working with each other, and especially if we're not communicating that to each other, okay? So for example, there's a couple of organizations that have like a little letter or have, you know, meetings and luncheons with their local law enforcement agencies and talk about things like confidentiality. Like, this is what confidentiality we have to follow, you know, VAWA confidentiality federally, and we want to work with you, so let's find out ways that we can while also adhering to confidentiality. So someone asked, are advocates at public universities system advocates? So if they're generally if they're working with the law enforcement or like the university police, then they would be considered system advocates. However, someone at like a women's center generally are considered community advocates. And Utah specifically has a institution confidentiality for advocates statute that defines their confidentiality. So that's a really good question. Okay, and then so community-based advocates literally will serve victims regardless of if they interact with that criminal justice system. So our job is to meet that person where they are, to empower them and help them, you know, start that journey to healing and to maybe justice, right? So again, you know, generally community-based advocates work, you know, with victims of domestic and sexual violence, human trafficking, other forms of intimate or interpersonal violence. So system-based advocates. System-based advocates are such an excellent resource. So these are folks that are literally in the criminal justice system. These folks literally have the information that we need, right? Desperately need, especially when we're working with protective orders, when we're working with stalking injunctions. So if you haven't reached out, or if you don't know who your local system-based advocate is, go and meet with them, go and talk with them, right? And get to know them, find out who they are, and link those resources, okay? So one of the things that's incredibly important is that system-based advocates do not hold the same confidentiality as community-based, right? So system-based advocates, their confidentiality comes from policies that are at the municipality, the county, the government office, the law enforcement agency that they are housed in, right? And remember, it's really important that if we are referring survivors and victims to community or to system-based advocates, that we are letting them know that there is a confidentiality difference, right? And that the things that they do say, the things that they do share can and you know, will be shared with law enforcement and police, right? Which can be a really good thing, right? Especially if that's what that survivor wants, is to interact with law enforcement and go through, criminal proceedings, other forms of protection like protective orders. So system-based advocates are busy. So remember that they work with all victims of crime. So folks that are specifically interacting and intersecting with the criminal justice system, okay? So it's important that if, hey, you reach out to your local system-based advocate and you're like, heck, why are they not returning my emails, right? It's just, be mindful that system-based advocates do a lot, and that we may need to reach out again, or just be really understanding that they deal with a lot, okay? So here is a little cat break, kind of, sometimes talking about different types of advocates can be a little stressful. So here's little Jorge about 6 years ago. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the basics of being trauma informed, okay? So I would love for you to type in that question box. I would love for you to tell me what you think, what you believe, maybe what you've been educated, what you've been taught, what you think trauma-informed care, trauma-informed advocacy is. So you go ahead and tell me, what do you think it is? Trauma-informed advocacy. Ooh, approaching the situation from a victim's perspective, understanding how trauma affects the survivor. Care that is informed on different forms of trauma and how they can manifest. Yes, love that. Let's see. Understand that people who've experienced trauma do not always react to events the way that quote unquote normal folks, or normal, that is normal and expected, right? And we need to understand that reactivity. Yes. Understand where they are coming from and how to help. Yeah, that's really big. When we are able to identify it, like, oh heck, I think this person is reacting to some of the trauma that they've experienced. I can identify that, and I can also hold space for that person and allow for them to kind of work through it, and also provide resources. We know about the hypothalamus. That's great. Love that. Showing empathy, right? Think about how empathy connects us, right? I'm a very empathetic person, and I think that's a really big part of why I enjoy the work I do, especially with other advocates, is that I am able to kind of have that empathetic connection with them, and provide those resources with them. Ooh, we listen. That's good. We understand how long healing can take. Nice. This is really great. Thank you, everyone. That was awesome. Okay. So trauma-informed advocacy. Excuse me. So this is an approach, literally engaging folks that, potentially have histories of trauma. And we also recognize that, that there could be, and that maybe there are, symptoms of trauma, right? And we acknowledge that role that trauma has played in their lives. So especially with the numbers that we see throughout the United States, and the numbers specifically that we see in Utah, and I'm sure the folks who are on here from Michigan and Alabama, I'm sure we can get you access to those numbers for your states as well. But the numbers are pretty high, right? So the chances of us interacting with someone who's experienced a form of trauma, especially domestic or sexual violence, is pretty high, right? And I really like this. I really like this statement here. When we're thinking about trauma-informed care, when we're thinking about, approaching someone that, may have experienced trauma or is maybe acting out, is we say this, or we ask this to ourselves, what has happened to them? Not what is wrong with them, and what does it mean to them, right? What does it mean to them? So think about, especially when we talk about youth, for kids who maybe act out or are labeled quote unquote delinquent, right? Think about what people say, maybe teachers, parents, friends, neighbors, what they might say or do, when this, child comes home or they're acting out, like, what is wrong with you? Why can't you just, when in reality, what we should be asking, what we should be thinking is, what has happened to you to make you react in this way? Why are you responding in this way, right? And that's really, really changes the dynamic and the way that we even see people. I will tell you that learning about, becoming trauma informed has benefited my life in ways that you can't even imagine. Even the way that I interact with my friends, my family, people that I just meet, even if I receive a passive aggressive email, I know, okay, so this person is experiencing something right now. I understand that maybe I'm feeling something in my belly right now, and how do I respond to them in a trauma-informed way, right? Even with my cats, and this seems kind of interesting, but my little sweet Totico, he was a little feral kitty, and when I got him as a baby, he was very standoffish. Couldn't hold him, couldn't pet him for a very long time. And 3.5 years later of, having him, loving him, and kind of meeting him where he is, where now he comes up to me, he cuddles every night, he feels safe. And think about if I would have just, been kind of rough with him and like, I want to cuddle you, you're my cat. But what I did is I met him where he was. I was slow and intentional, and I allowed him to, kind of define how our relationship was. And now he is just a little cuddle goose, and I love it. So there you go, trauma-informed care in action with cats. So imagine how it works for people, right? So there are 3 tenets of trauma-informed advocacy. And remember, this is from the SAMHSA model of trauma-informed care. So I read that big 358-page document, and I crunched it down to some bite-sized pieces for y'all, okay? So you will have access to this PowerPoint if you look in the handouts. The PDF is available for you to download, and at the back, so the last page, there are sources and they have links to all this stuff. So you're absolutely welcome to check those out. So first part is realizing the prevalence, right? So where's it, how often is it happening to stuff like that, right? So in Utah, we have, 1 in 3 women and 1 in 3 men report experiencing intimate partner violence in their lifetime, right? Nationally, it's 1 in 4 and 1 in 4. And this is a national number, is 1 in 5 transgender folks experience intimate partner violence at home, right? And then we have, recognizing how trauma affects folks. So we talk about like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? This response that folks may have after experiencing trauma, right? Secondary traumatic response, we have that secondary trauma, compassion fatigue, trauma bonding. We are going to go into great depth on this on the self-care presentation here in a couple weeks, the webinar in a couple weeks. So make sure that you're registered for that, because we're going to go all over these, and we're going to talk about ways to help with that. Okay. So responding. So strength and empowerment based, right? That we're putting safety first, that trust is upheld, that we're supporting, we're collaborating, right? And intersectionality. So in the guide, I believe it says honoring cultural differences, and I put it into one word. This coming from this intersectional approach is very, very important, right? So think about this commonness of trauma, right? So we talked about these numbers, right? The Utah numbers, and think about adverse childhood experiences. So we're starting to see, especially in the past couple years, right? We're starting to see more and more folks having these conversations about ACEs, right? And it's really opened our eyes, especially as advocates, right? And folks who work with survivors and victims of trauma, to kind of help this person see of, hey, why am I responding this way? Or I have been struggling with my weight for years and years and years, and I just can't do it, right? And so think about how these not only affect the survivors we're working with, but how they affect us as advocates, right? Especially when we're hearing these, some of the worst things that folks have been through on a daily basis, right? And that, can be very triggering. It can be very activating for us. And how can we be, very aware of that and understand the ways that we may respond to that, right? And this is really wild. So this bottom number, so the Utah Department of Health, so they surveyed, let's see, so they surveyed Utah adults, and in Utah, 63% reported at least one ACE, so one adverse childhood experience, right? And imagine, imagine how many ACEs, the folks around us, our family members, our friends have experienced, right? So here's actually a really quick story. So the adverse childhood experiences, even think about how we respond. So, I've been on a journey to, lose weight. I've been, pretty overweight most of my life. At one point I lost 145 pounds. My mom passed away, and I, gained a significant amount of weight back. And when I, started, kind of losing weight again, I would notice that as soon as I started getting results, that I would be very anxious. I wouldn't feel very good. I had a lot of physical symptoms, and I was like, oh no, like maybe I'm sick. But think about how maybe the only time I've ever been, not obese in my life was when I lost, had that really a difficult, time, that trauma with losing my mom, and how I linked that, and that was a huge barrier. So think about when we're working with survivors, how some of the things that we hear and we're experiencing with them could also kind of trigger some of these things. Yeah. Okay, so recognizing how trauma affects folks. So well, hopefully you're noticing, but if I can sneak in a little picture of Sasquatch in a presentation, I'm going to do it, okay? So we have fight, flight, freeze here, right? So we have fight, the bear coming at us, maybe. We have flight, sassy, definitely peacing out, doesn't want to hang out, doesn't want to be filmed. And then we have freeze, right? Dinosaurs are up there. We definitely want to freeze. We want to get away. So think about how not only we respond to stress, but think about how survivors respond to stress. And think about when we go into survival mode, right? When our brains and our bodies are like, okay, we're in a place that we feel like we need to just survive, right? And we are doing whatever we can to survive. And think about what happens when we go through trauma, when we re-experience trauma, or when we even try to address trauma that we've had, okay? So love this picture, right? I'm sure all of us know how we respond and how we react to stress, right? So I'm a freezer. So when I go hiking and I'm, scanning around and I see something moving, I freeze, because I definitely need to make sure it's not a Sasquatch, right? Usually it's just a deer. Don't worry about it. I've never seen a Sassy. But that's what I do, is I freeze. And then if I can determine what it is, then I, continue, and that stress is alleviated. If I can't figure out what it is, I immediately turn around and I start to run. So if you've ever been hiking with me, if you ever go hiking with me, and I stop and then I turn around and run, it's because I fear that Sasquatch is in front of us, okay? So now we're going to talk about these common responses to trauma, okay? So this first one, disassociation. So this is really interesting, because this is something that we all probably do on an everyday basis, right? And maybe not now, if we are staying in our home and we're trying to be intentional about connection with other people, maybe this is a big part of how we're kind of surviving right now, right? So think about this reduced awareness of oneself or the environment, right? Maybe even zoning out, not picking up details, not noticing things. This connection between memory and this disassociation is pretty strong. So here's a great example. So think about when we're driving to work. Say some of us who have a long commute. So my commute's probably about 45 minutes when I go into the office. But generally I work I travel and do trainings at different organizations. So my commute on average is probably about two and a half hours, right? If I average it for a year. So I, drive the same way to maybe the office, when I go, and I'll get to the office and I'll park and be like, oh heck, how did I get here? Like, I don't even remember driving here, right? Well, I know how I got there. I followed the same route that I always follow, but I kind of like zoned out and kind of disconnected during that drive, right? So, think about how we may do this every day when we're feeling bored, when we're, zoning out, whatever. And think about how when a survivor is talking about their story, what happened to them, going over details, that this may be a big reason why they do not remember details. This may be a big reason why they say things like, well, I don't know, or I don't remember, or, oh, I don't know, right? Is because of that disassociation. It's because their brain, their body, their mind was literally trying to protect them, trying to help them survive that situation, right? So I don't know if you've heard this, but, many places have policies where, if a survivor or victim comes into shelter, that they don't do advocacy, they don't talk about it, they don't do anything until after that survivor has had 2 sleeps. Now think about the difference between 2 sleeps, right, and 2 days. For some folks, it may be 2 days. For other folks, it may be, a week that they've actually been able to sleep, right? So think about that, right? Think about how, beneficial that can be to allow that person to, be able to sleep and kind of find that little bit of even healing or stabilization there, right? Hyperarousal. So this is that fight, flight, freeze, right? But on a continual basis. So think about, maybe folks that you've worked with who startle easy, maybe on a constant alert or sensitive to other people's reactions. So this is really big. This is the one that I've heard about the most and I've seen the most when working with survivors, right, and victim advocates, is they'll be like, well, I don't understand, when I provide or talk about a protective order, that they get upset or they are unhappy or they leave or they don't contact me back. And it could be because they're sensitive. It could be because they're worried, right? It could be, because they are nervous, right, about what can happen. So think about that. Think about maybe survivors who are coming in and having panic attacks, folks who are maybe talking about how nightmares or can't sleep or irritable or anxious. And think about how all these, like, these signs, these symptoms, right? Symptoms are something that person, a victim, the survivor experiences, and signs are things that like advocates can see. So think about how this literally can look like so many different things, right? Like, think about how many of us are maybe experiencing all of these things, right? I know, like, lately, the past, especially couple weeks, that I've had kind of a bellyache because I am nervous, right? It's stuff, hanging out in my house, can be fine, but it's also nerve-wracking that I can't make those connections with people that I love and care about, right? So then we have intrusion or re-experiencing symptoms. So think about this. Oftentimes goes in conjunction with the next one that we talk about, which is avoidance, right? So maybe, someone, when they have nightmares, night terrors, maybe when they smell a certain thing or they see a certain thing, that they, start to re-experience, or they think about it more, things like this. Think about how, I don't know, probably all of us have an example of this when we are walking through the store, we're walking somewhere, maybe we're at a conference and someone passes us and they have, it's their shampoo or their, what is it, perfume. I was going to say deodorant. I'm like, well, if you can smell someone's deodorant while they're walking by, then I guess that's okay too. But, some smell that, wafts into your nose as someone walks by, and you immediately, get this memory of a person, a place, or a thing, right? Yeah, it's really, really interesting. There are several, smells that, walk by, or people that I know that I work with, and it's like, that's really interesting because I know that, smell, it smells so familiar, but maybe I can't place it. So think about the same for this, these folks. Think about when, people are maybe listening to music, listening to the radio, and a song comes on and they get really quiet, or they, have closed off body language all of a sudden, or they are nervous and maybe they are moving their leg or kind of shaking or something. Like maybe it's something in the song. Maybe it reminds them of that person that has abused them, right? So this avoidance, this constriction. So think about, this is a really common response, especially to fear in humans, is that we tend to avoid things that we are fearful of, right? So think about even in my like Sasquatch story, is that I am going to do whatever I can to avoid having an interaction with Sassy. Like definitely, like I'm feeling it, like you live here, this is your space, love it, but I don't really want to have a conversation with you, okay? And so think about, with survivors is that they may deny, they may be detached, not only emotionally, but also physically. So they withdraw from people, activities, friends, family, maybe even when they're talking about something, their affect, their emotions may not, match up. So think about ways that they're trying to avoid or, push to the side some of these things. So it's really difficult to talk about some of the traumas and things that we've been through. So remember that it's not easy for people, even when we're in a safe place, like maybe a domestic violence service provider or, talking with a victim advocate, that it still can be very difficult. And think about some survivors who literally avoid places like a grocery store, like they will not go to Smith's. Or when they're, they drive into the Smith's parking lot, they'll drive all around and they'll check all the cars to make sure that there isn't a similar car or the car of their partner, ex-partner, right? So think about why they could be doing the things that they do, right? And especially this denial piece, I'm definitely gonna bring that up again. Denial is big. So when you are talking with someone and they are talking or they're denying what's happening or refusing to talk about it, this could be why. This could be why, okay? So think about how we promote mental health within our resources. Think about not only what we do, but think about, what, like, for example, the American Psychological Association suggests. And this, especially right now, we're probably seeing a lot of this. We're probably seeing a lot of emails, a whole bunch of stuff of people, saying, okay, well, manage your stress, make sure to stay physically active, a whole bunch of places are giving out free trials and free memberships and free things right now, right? But when we are experiencing stress, when we're experiencing being overwhelmed, and then we have this society crisis happening, it can be really difficult to eat healthy, right? It can be really difficult to be like, okay, I need to sit down and I need to plan meals. How do I do this? How do I use this to help manage my stress, right? Ooh, love this part. This is really interesting. So a big part of being an advocate is healing injustice, right? And many times we are kind of in the middle and bridging the gap between the legal definitions and lived experience of healing and of justice, right? So this is what I want y'all to do. So I want y'all to, in the question box, I want you to tell me how you as an advocate, as a person, etc., how you define healing. How do you define healing? All right, let's see, got a couple folks coming. Okay, so authentic emotion, having created safety, any progress made so that the trauma doesn't affect you as much, okay? Moving towards fewer signs and symptoms of PTSD and stress, nice. Let's see. Moving forward, this being something bad that happened to you, but not something that makes you re-traumatized to think about. Ooh, interesting. Okay. Yep. Peace from the stress or the struggle. Know that it's not your fault. That's a big one. Being able to leave the hurt and pain in the past, accept it as part of your story. Yeah, that's part of me. That's you know, that's okay for me to have been affected by this, and it's also okay for this to be part of me. Oh, helping others find a place of safety and stability in which their trauma is no longer or has a dysfunctional impact on their life. Nice, nice. Be you and love you. Ooh, that's a big one. Ooh, focusing on the goals that the client has for themselves. Yeah, healing on their terms. Okay. Nice. That's excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. So think about how survivors may define healing, right? Think about, so a bunch of those things that y'all said, that those are similar ways that survivors, may define healing. So think about, folks may say, I just want my children to be happy, or I want to be able to practice self-care. I want to be able to do those cross stitches, those kits that I bought, 5 years ago. I want to be able to sit down and cross stitch that super sweet picture of that sloth, right? Think about going to see a therapist, right? Or even just the abuse stopping. Like that could be healing. That could be the start of healing, right? Being supported, okay? Maybe finding love again, right? How many times have we heard survivors maybe say that? Like, I wish that I could love again, or I'm just so nervous to be in a relationship again because I don't want to be hurt, right? Okay, same thing, but now with justice. So how do y'all define justice? How do you define justice? Let's see. Okay. Ooh, the victim feeling that they have power back in their lives and situation, being at peace. Reparations for victims of DV as well as victims of the justice system. Ooh, victim finding safety and comfort. Abuser takes responsibility for actions. Okay, yeah. Justice occurs when the victim is believed and systems move to punish the perpetrator, not the victim. Okay. Feelings of empowerment. Feeling empowerment, yeah. Taking back control of their life. Ooh, yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. Ooh, being able to either forgive or be at peace with the situation. Freedom from fear. That's a big one. Abuser and victim restored to communal peace. Nice. Yeah, look at all of these things that y'all are coming up with. These are excellent. These are excellent. So there's a reason why I have this picture, right? Oftentimes when we think about justice, oftentimes when we define justice, when we talk about it, we think of it in terms of good versus evil. We think of it in terms of Lord of the Rings. We think of it in terms of superhero movies, right? Where the bad person dies in the end, or they hella spend the rest of their life in prison or whatever, right? Or they're melted in something, right? But in reality, justice does not look like that. That definition, that view of justice that we have been fed throughout our lives very rarely exists, right? And especially in what y'all are saying, what you have experienced, the stories that I'm hearing, that justice does not look like that, right? And of course, mostly, maybe because we don't have a volcano close that we can like throw an evil ring into or whatever, but think about that justice does not look like what it looks like on TV. It's not tightly packed in an hour-long episode of Law and Order. That justice just does not look like that, right? It can look like that, but generally it doesn't. Okay, so think about how survivors and victims might define justice, right? Partner stops abuse, right? Very similar to what we saw a couple slides ago. Survivor seeing partner fail or being hurt, right? Think about folks wanting to see the person who hurt them experience the same level of hurt or pain that they experienced, right? Survivor being able to share their story. So one of the most healing and even justice-inducing things can literally be that survivor being allowed to stand up in court and say what happened to them, share that with not only the person who perpetrated that violence against them, but also with other people, and be heard and be believed, right? That is huge. That is huge, right? And that absolutely can be the definition of justice for some folks. Some folks may think that capital punishment is justice, maybe the partner with abusive behavior losing parental rights. So think about this, and think about the way that we define justice, the way that we define healing. Okay, how can that differ from the person sitting in front of me, the person that I'm talking to, right? The person that I'm video conferencing with? How can that differ? And how do I make sure that my views of justice, right, that I am not pushing that upon that person, right? Because that may not work for them, and that may not be beneficial for them. Here's sweet Jorge living his best life. I think this is like 6 years ago. He's still just equally cute. Okay, so now we're going to talk about responding, right? So responding in a way that limits and hopefully stops, right? Us, that re-traumatization, right? So we want to promote healing and promote safety, okay? So here are the 6 things that we're going to talk about. We have safety, trust, support, collaboration, intersectionality, strength, and empowerment based, right? I think those kind of got listed up there. So safety. So I want you to ask yourself this question, okay? So you're going to get a copy of this. You can download it now. This is something that I want you to ask yourself. Maybe do it as homework today. Maybe do it this week, next week. This could even be a really interesting activity for you to do with your friends and family right now, right? If you are, at home with your family, you're working from home, you're been around your family, for a couple of weeks, and you're maybe feeling a little stressed, sit down and maybe talk about that. Talk about how can we, address our feelings of being unsafe, right? So think about all these different ways, like safety planning, active listening, right? Sharing information, okay? Even helping that survivor identify triggers that they may have, right? And then how can we avoid decreasing safety? Is that we're making sure that we're communicating, we're making sure that we're collaborating, and we are not creating a power and control dynamic. So that means we are not telling the victim, we are not telling survivor what they should, could, and need to do, right? What we are doing is we are listening, meeting them where they are, and helping to empower them, right? So think about how your behavior, policies, practices, beliefs can create a power and control dynamic, okay? First step is being aware of it so that we can stop it, right? Trust. So how can we increase trust between survivor and advocate, survivor and advocacy organizations, survivor and police agencies, system-based advocates, right? So, sometimes we hear stories of folks saying, well, survivors, they just have to come in, they just have to do it. Like, we're a good organization, it's their problem if they don't come to see us. When in reality, if you're not seeing a certain demographic, if you're not seeing a certain marginalized population, if you're not seeing a certain group of people or people, that could be a really good indicator that your organization, your policies, practices are not accessible, they're not safe for survivors and victims, right? So think about, we don't want to blame victims, we don't want to do this. We really want to look within ourselves and see what can we do to possibly create the most trauma-informed organization, waiting room, office, so on and so forth, right? So first and foremost, you believe that survivor. If a survivor comes in and tells you a story and you're like, okay, like what the heck, what's going on here? Is that we, instead of saying, oh, well, no, it's probably not happening, is that we're believing that survivor. So here's a really good example. Is survivor comes in and says, I feel like I'm being watched in my house. I feel like the walls are listening to me. When I sit down to read at night, all my lights go off and the stereo turns on, and I don't know what to do. And you're like, okay, sounds like you have electronic issues. Or this is 2020, right? Everything is smart now, right? Our fridges can order frozen pizzas and milk for us, and our microwave can read instructions for a recipe to us. I can tell my faucet, hey faucet, 1 cup of 98-degree water, and it will pump out 1 cup of 98-degree perfectly temped water, right? So remember that if this person is sharing that with you, that it sounds like what's happening is that there's smart devices in the home, and that person with abusive behavior, that ex-partner, right, has access to it, and they're using it to control and to gaslight that person, right? So remember that maybe on the surface it might sound like, oh, that's a little interesting, but think about all the ways that people use power and control, especially in the digital age, right? A digital age. So, be willing to try different things. Maybe this is what's really nice about these webinars. This is what's really nice about going to conferences and having, conversations with other folks, is you learn different things from different people. So maybe something that you've tried and used for years has worked, pretty well, but it's not working right now. Maybe especially during the pandemic, that it's just not working. What are some other things that other people have tried that maybe have worked for them? Or, be willing to kind of step outside those boxes, okay? And then how do you avoid losing that survivor's trust? So make sure that you're following through, that if you say you're going to do something, you're going to be somewhere, that you do it. If you can't do something, then do not say that you can. So if you can't be there on Wednesday for protective order court, then don't say that you're going to be there, right? And that's okay. If you can't do it, then just don't bring it up, okay? And it's okay to set boundaries, right? And to do warm handoffs, and no empty promises, okay? If you notice, if you come to my trainings and stuff like that, when I say I'm going to send you an email, oh, you better believe you don't get the email, maybe 5 emails, right? That I send information that I can, and if I don't send a follow-up email, and you email me and say, hey, I didn't get those, and I'm like, oh gosh, maybe I got your email address wrong, or maybe I just forgot, right? But think about that. Don't make any empty promises, right? So if I can't send you 20 different resources, I'm not going to tell you I can. Support. So how can we provide support for that survivor? Okay, so active listening. I don't know how many times y'all have heard this, probably in the last even 2 weeks. Active listen, right? Validation, right? So there's a reason why we continually repeat this. There's a reason why this is a major tenet in trauma-informed care, because it works, because it helps with healing, with even senses of justice, with connection, right? It boosts support, it boosts trust. So these are things that have been, checked, tried, are true in the real world, and these are things that have consistently been beneficial, right? And remember that it's okay to express concern, okay? It's okay to express concern. If you're worried that someone is at risk for lethality, talk to them about that. Tell them that, hey, I'm worried some of these things that are happening in your home may put you at increased risk. How do you feel about doing a safety plan? Think about that, okay? How do we avoid pushing folks away? Avoid re-traumatization, avoid pushing or punishing or scolding for maladaptive coping strategies. So maladaptive coping strategy. So think about a survivor who maybe binge drinks a couple times a month, right? Maybe they come back to shelter and they've had a couple drinks, right? So think about you calling them into office and saying, you were intoxicated, I could smell it on your breath yesterday, you are going to be exited. So think about the difference between sitting down with them, having a conversation and saying, hey, I have noticed recently that you've been withdrawing. I've noticed that you came back to shelter yesterday and you had this alcohol in your breath. Can you talk to me about what's going on? Can you, what can I do to support you, right? So think about how different that is versus kicking that person out, scolding them for responding in a, very common and understandable way to being traumatized, and that we are responding in a way that is not trauma informed, right? Yeah, that can be really hard, because that's definitely not going to stop them to drink. They're like, oh, well, I got kicked out of my only shelter and refuge and safe place, so I guess I'm going to stop drinking now. I'm like, no, it'll probably unfortunately intensify that. Collaboration. It's not just you. You are not alone in this. There's me. You can reach out to me. You have my email address, my phone number, all the things, right? There's several people who've even texted me during this webinar, right? I'm here. This is my job. I'm literally one of the most accessible people. And I pride myself in that, because I'm here for you. I'm here to support you, especially through this really difficult time, okay? So think about how you can collaborate between not only other organizations, other domestic violence service providers, sexual assault programs, social service organizations, but what about businesses in your area? So, and again, this can be kind of difficult, especially right now. And how can we find creative ways to continue to partner with folks and businesses while also maintaining social distancing, right, and isolation, right? So think about, for example, there is an organization down south, and they, one of the things that I really love about what they do is, in their small area, they find creative ways to connect and partner with businesses and organizations that you wouldn't maybe think to partner with, right? So for example, partnering with like an oil change business, or like a tire rotate business, right? And you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, why would they? No. Do you think survivors are going in there to get their tires changed? Do you think survivors are going in there to get car repairs? Yeah. And think about a staff that not only has information brochures, but also think about the staff who has maybe some training in domestic violence, in knowing what to look for. That, those signs on automotive shops, and they say, due to insurance reasons, only owner of car or whatever can go back with employee. Well, they can absolutely use that to, leverage. They can use that to share resources. So so we have a survivor there, and, like, okay, one person can come back, and maybe they're with partner. Well, while they take maybe survivor back, they can say, hey, I noticed some of these things. If you ever need support, you can reach out here. We can, three-way call with da-da-da, or here's some resources. You're welcome to call us. The code word is this, and we can da-da-da, right? Or if partner's there and partner's like, absolutely not, I'm going back there, you wait here. That another staff member can go over and talk to that person and relay that same information, right? So think about that, right? Excellent example. So you are not alone, okay? And there are many places that you can reach out to, and make sure to find out what other organizations do, right? Because you may not know what they do, right? So this down here, avoid assuming other organizations offer services or resources, right? If your organization effectively and in a trauma-informed way houses and advocates for transgender survivors, don't assume that every other organization will. Make sure that you know if that organization houses transgender survivors, and if they do, in what way. So if they house transgender survivors based on their birth sex, that's going to be a real big problem, right? Especially for that survivor. And that will be re-traumatizing. That survivor may not ever engage in resources again. That could be really, really dangerous for that survivor, right? What if, the organization on their website says, oh yeah, we, house everyone. Well, when the word everyone is very misleading, right? Because oftentimes it doesn't mean everyone. There are groups that are specifically excluded, right? So make sure that you're reaching out, you're having conversations. And when you call, so have you housed trans folks before? What do you do in instances of discrimination against that person, right? And make sure that you're calling before you have a transgender survivor and not calling for a transgender survivor, because then that could potentially out that person. Okay. Okay. Oh, my little voice went. I think I've been talking too much for the last hour. So intersectionality. So I love intersectionality. So intersectionality is the intersections and interactions of our identities and systems of oppression, right? So, think about how we can honor different cultures, communities, and identities, right? And it's not just in talk, it's in practice. So, if you're saying, oh yeah, well, we're inclusive of everyone, we love and care about everyone, can we see that through your practices? Can we see that you do house and you do work in a culturally competent way with transgender survivors of communities of color? What about undocumented folks, folks that English isn't their first language? Like, you can say it 1,000 times, but are you putting it in practice? Can we see that that's happening, right? And that can be difficult, right? You do have support. I'm here, the coalition's here. There's a number of different organizations around the state that do specialize and do really, really great anti-oppression work, okay? So educate yourself. So remember, it's not, we don't want to put that pressure, we don't want to put that on the shoulder of the survivor to tell us how to serve them, okay? There's a difference between asking, would you be comfortable coming to a women's support group, or would you be more comfortable coming to a men's support group, versus I've never met a transgender person, so I don't know how to serve you. What should I do? Okay, a little bit different, right? So, reach out to different organizations, communities and stuff. We have a number of webinars. Our 40-hour trainings have a number of different community organizations that do presentations. So reach out. There's a number of different organizations that are out there, many of which are on our website. Many of our member programs are, excellent resources, okay? So, make sure that you're offering more options for healing, so that we're not just, traditional, quote unquote, talk therapy is great. I have a therapist, love my therapist, right? Definitely is awesome. However, not everyone is going to be receptive to therapy, and not everyone is maybe going to benefit from therapy in a way that other people might. So make sure that you have different options for healing. So this could be meditation groups, this could be art groups, this could be I just lost my train of thought. I couldn't think of the last one. Maybe I'll remember it here in a sec. But even like sweat lodges, or like very traditional native practices of healing, even ceremony, right? Think about a month ago, Urban Indian Center had the first Two-Spirit powwow in Utah, and that was a huge event. That was a very healing. It was such a wonderful community event, right? Think about stuff like that. Like, are they available, and who can I connect? What organizations can I reach out to? Okay. And of course, we want to avoid re-traumatization. We need to really be aware of our words, our behaviors, our beliefs, and our values, right? So if you don't believe something, or if you have maybe negative views about, for example, let's use the running example of like trans folks, that can greatly impact the way that you're serving survivors, and not just transgender survivors. So think about how the things that you believe, the words that you say, your behaviors, how that can send a message to that survivor that I'm not safe here, that I don't deserve healing, that I don't deserve care. So really remember, and really look within yourself, and try and counter some of those views and values. And if you do have maybe some beliefs or values, like maybe, for example, like we were talking about negative views on a certain group, that you can reach out to me. I have a whole bunch of resources on a number of folks. I can connect you to other resources. There's always time to be more trauma informed. So there are resources out here. And then strength and empowerment base. So we're literally here to meet folks, where they are, to validate, to empower, right? We're not here to do things for them, okay? Because if we're doing things for them, they're not learning they're not able to take control of their lives. Think about how that is literally creating that power and control dynamic over again, right? So think about ways we can empower folks, you know? Think about the last time you shared something hard with someone and they thanked you for sharing that. Think about that. That is whoa, right? So thank them, you know, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm really glad you came in, right? I really like the second one too. It sounds like that has worked for you in the past. How do you feel about doing that again? Right? So remember, not pushing on them, not pressuring them, asking them how they feel, asking them what might work for them. Because believe it or not, they know their lives best, and they know the person with abusive behavior, that, excuse me, that situation that they've been in the best. So we're going to take their lead. Okay. So again, you know, avoid recreating power dynamics is we are not telling them what they need to do, how to do things. We can support them and give them assistance. If, you know, someone's asking, well, how do I send a text message on my phone? That is something that we can easily walk them through, right? But, oh, yep, absolutely. So if you go to your phone and you see that icon right there, you're just going to click on that, right? And think about how we can educate them and how we can support them in ways that we're not doing it for them, right? So this bottom one, avoid forcing or requiring survivors to complete certain things before support is offered or given. This includes drug testing and background checks. Okay. So when we talk about confidentiality, federal and state confidentiality next week, we are going to go over this in some detail. So this we need to make sure that we're not requiring folks to be drug tested. We're not requiring these things before they're allowed into shelter or to receive services. We can't do it through our funding. Our funding explicitly disallows that. But also it is not trauma informed. And that's an additional barrier that we are placing on that survivor, and literally waiting for a background check or a drug test could mean the literal life and death of someone. Okay? So absolutely not. Absolutely not. And we got a super sweet picture of a moose now. So I was like, gonna mix it up. Like, is it gonna be a cat pic? Is it gonna be a sweet moose pic? Okay. So we have a little activity, right? So what we're going to do is I'm going to read a scenario. And if you noticed how I wrote this out, I thought this was real smart. Andy'll read a scenario. So I'm using combining words here. So I'm going to read a scenario, and then I want you to answer the question in the answer box. Okay. So let's start with this one, okay? So remember, I want you to really focus on how this is not trauma informed. I do not want you to tell me, I don't want you to justify why this should happen, because if you have to justify a policy, then there might be a problem with that policy, okay? So, scenario. The shelter that you work at has a policy that states that male survivors are not housed at shelter. When a male survivor reaches out for services, they are given a hotel voucher or referred to another organization. So, first question, type your answer in the question box. How is this not trauma informed? Okay, so no support, no safety, okay. Hotel does not give same level of support and is isolating, denying services, not equal services, right? Especially in like VAWA, we have to provide comparable services, and 2 days, 3 days in a hotel is not comparable services to 90 days in shelter. Yep, it's not an exclusive, it's inclusive, it's not an inclusive policy, excuse me. It doesn't take into account that males need safety too, yep. They may feel like they're not important, or that they're not actual victims, not being accepted, not collaborating with other agencies that could provide necessary support. May trigger a further fight-flight response for self-survival, minimizes needs, bias. Suggests that a survivor has done something wrong because they are male and that they cannot be a victim. Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big one. Nice. Does not establish trust with a victim. True, true. Okay, that's excellent. Let's answer this next question. What would you do or change to create a more trauma-informed environment? What would you do? What would you change about this policy to create a more trauma-informed environment? I'm feeling some big answers coming on here. Ooh, exclusion or inclusion policy to provide a shelter and outreach services. Yep. Accept male survivors into shelter. And this one says keep males and females separate. Utah does, in our code, does have requirements for sex segregated services. So let's see. Yep, reserved shelters have specific areas. Assure the victim that a case manager will contact them and work on finding a safe place. Link male victims to appropriate shelter and same level of support. Let's see, talk with the board of directors and ask to change policy. Yep. And you know what, that's a big thing, because many times, oftentimes board of directors are the ones that make the policies, and they are folks that may not work within that organization or actually see what is happening and the need, right? So yeah, these are really great ones. Changing policies, update policies, and there's some ways that we can work around some of those policies and stuff. And create a place, especially, we have the ability to speak out to folks and say, hey, this isn't working for us. We're having a really hard time serving all survivors. We either need a domestic violence service provider or a crisis center exclusion or exemption or, yeah. Okay. So this is excellent. So, all right, for sake of time, we're going to go into resources, but I have created something that I'm very excited about. I want to include a game that we play at the end of these webinars. I know that right now we can't be in person with each other, and I recognize many of your names on the attendance list here. Many of you have seen me in person, so you kind of know what to expect. So I want to play a game. It is called My Cat or Raccoon. So in this game, each week, I will have a picture, a cutoff of a picture, and I want you to guess, is this a picture of one of my super sweet cats, or is this a picture of a cute raccoon? So everyone vote now in that question box. Do you think that this is my cat or do you think this is a raccoon? Oh, okay, we're about, ooh, nice. So we're about 90% cat and about 10% raccoon. Okay. All right, what else? Okay. A lot of folks. Okay. You ready for this? You ready? It's a raccoon. Isn't that a sweet little face? So I am so excited for this game. For the past several days, I have literally been on the edge of my seat waiting for this webinar. So here's the game that we'll play. Oh, and I will tell you, it will get more difficult because my cats, both of them, look very much like a raccoon. But this is a very cute picture of a sweet little raccoon's face. I think it's a National Geographic picture, but yes. So thank you everyone for playing. That was excellent. And so now let's go over some more resources. Hopefully that gave you a little laugh. Hopefully that brought a little joy to your day today. Okay. So we talked about this a little bit earlier about what services that domestic violence services providers in Utah offer, right? But now let's go over some more of these resources specifically, okay? So we have Love is Respect. So if any of you have heard of Love is Respect, it's a really great organization. So they have a lot of information, support, advocacy for young folks, right? And especially about dating relationships. So this is really great. Make sure to download that PowerPoint that's in the handout section of your webinar control panel. And then Futures Without Violence. Futures Without Violence is excellent. They do so much great work, and many of you have their little handouts in your organization. So this is a really good organization to also reach out to. So Break the Cycle. This organization, really great programs for young folks. So ages 12 to 24, okay? All right, so next one we have NNEDV, National Network to End Domestic Violence. So really excellent resource, especially this safety net website, because you can get so many good technology resources from them. Love it. They have so many guides for technology use for not only survivors, but also service providers, so advocates. So we have the National Domestic Violence Hotline. So this is available 24 hours, 7 days a week, which is really, really great. A lot of really great resources, national resources, and they can connect you to your local area. And we have Strong Hearts, Native Helpline. So this is a really good resource for Native folks, okay? So they have, their hours are 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Central Standard Time, and their website has so many really cool resources. Love them. And then we have our sibling coalition, Utah Coalition Against Sexual Assault. They have a website that has a lot of great resources, and they have an app. So their app has a lot of cool stuff on it, and they do have the 24-hour sexual violence as well. And then there is us, the Utah Domestic Violence Coalition link line that's available 24 hours, 7 days a week. And it is awesome. You get to talk to Sam and other advocates that are on there. And there's so many resources that are available in Utah that people may not know, but this is an excellent resource. So you can click on any of these and get to any of our social media. We have Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, where you'll find a whole bunch of webinars. And then we have our website, which again, additional resources. And we did just put some more COVID-19 resources on there. So you have a whole bunch of, I think it's a resource roundup, all in one place for you to get your information and go. This has been a wonderful hour and a half that I have loved to spend with all 101 of you. Biggest webinar attendance I've ever had, which is super great. Yeah, so here's my information. That is my office line. If you call it, I'm not going to be in the office, but I will get the voicemail via email. But if you do call me and you want me to call you back, please make sure you state that in the email, and say your phone number slow. Sometimes the quality of those voicemails can be bad, but say it slow and maybe repeat it twice. And also you can email me at any time. So thank you, everyone. I'm really glad that you all enjoyed the new game. I am so excited for next week. And I will see you next week at 10 a.m. Have a wonderful, safe week. Thank you.